Hi, welcome to SOARing, where we dive into the complex world of ADHD and other learning challenges. I'm John Willson, SOAR's Executive Director. And today we are talking about dysgraphia, what it is, how we can help with Kelli Fetter. She's an occupational therapist, an educational consultant, and a handwriting tutor. Kelli is also the founder of Handwriting Solutions. Kelli, thank you so much for joining us here today.
Thank you, John. I always love to have conversations with you, and I'm also just super excited to share a little bit more with your listeners about handwriting and a little bit about dysgraphia and everything in between. So I will start. Let me share my screen and slideshow. So a little bit about handwriting solutions. I'll start with kind of my story. So I started handwriting solutions really because of a gap in the industry. You know, my daughter was diagnosed with dyslexia and dysgraphia, and being an occupational therapist, and I worked in pediatrics for years, I was still just I just didn't know where to turn, didn't know who to go to for help. And so, the reading piece, there's a lot of resources out there, but the writing side of that and the dysgraphia piece was super hard, even as an occupational therapist. So what I did, I read the research, I deep dove all of the books, everything that was out there to try to understand how to help her. And so really what I noticed was again that gap in the industry. And so I thought, okay, many OTs don't understand dysgraphia. A lot of educators don't understand dysgraphia. How can we better serve these kids that are slipping through the cracks? Thus, Handwriting Solutions was born. And of course, we serve kids who have dysgraphia as well as kids who just struggle. Maybe they just missed out on some foundational skills too. So we'll talk a little bit about what those foundational skills are as well. So let's dive in.
Kelly, I just want to affirm that so many of the best solutions that are available for our kids are born out of individuals that either struggled with learning or attention challenges or are parents of kids who struggle with learning and attention challenges. SOAR is no different. SOAR was founded by, an adult with learning disabilities that wanted to find a better path and create opportunities for success. And so I'm thrilled to hear of your origin story.
Right,
Right.
exactly. I feel like we all have a story, right? We don't just like come into this. Yeah, I mean, but I think that that's what also makes SOAR unique, as well as Handwriting Solutions, is that we do have a bit of a story and we do have that passion because we see those needs on a daily basis. So, yeah, I think that's what makes our organizations work. So, a little bit about what we're going to talk about. We're going to better understand dysgraphia, some signs and symptoms, how that impacts education and beyond, really. I want you all to walk away with some tips and tools and strategies, and then also looking and understanding some accommodations and modifications. And I'll talk a little bit more about that too, because oftentimes we think that it has to be either or. So either we need to remediate or we need to accommodate, meaning they need intervention or they just need a laptop. That's kind of the easiest. But really, it's so much more than that. It's both. And a little bit to kind of backstep, what is dysgraphia? Because some of you all may not even know that may be a new term for you all, or you've heard of it, but you still don't really know what it is. So it's kind of like the third wheel of the specific learning disabilities. So what I like to think about is specific learning disabilities is kind of that umbrella term. So in the diagnostic manual, you've got three different tiers. You've got dyslexia, which is the learning disability in reading. You've got dyscalculia, which is the learning disability in math. And then you've got dysgraphia, which is the learning disability in writing. And so we're going to be talking about that piece. So essentially, dysgraphia means impaired graphia, making letter forms by hand. So that's kind of the general, like that's what it is. It doesn't really need to be more complicated than that. A little bit of a difference of you may have also heard of disorder of written expression. So sometimes when children have a diagnosis, it may not be called dysgraphia. It may be called disorder of written expression because that's how some of the coding or whatever on the diagnostic can. But essentially, they can be used interchangeably. It's a specific learning disorder with impairment in written expression, and that's key to remember. So it's any kind of that output. So when we think about reading, reading is kind of the input. We're deciphering, decoding those letters and words. That's all coming into our brain. Writing and dysgraphia is that output. So showing our knowledge through writing. So let's talk about what it might look like. Dysgraphia can literally be as something as simple as illegible or messy handwriting. That's first like clue that parents see is they're like, what's going on here? Why can't my kid write? Or why is it so messy? So that's usually a big sign, but also it could be pain or fatigue with writing. It can be that output of writing. So poor formation of letters, poor spacing among letters and words, poor line placement. So their letters are just all over the place on the page. They can have a slow rate of writing. So their writing is just really labored, really intense and really hard for them. They might have some motor delays. So maybe an awkward pencil grasp or just some discomfort even. They could also have difficulty spelling, which a little bit overlaps with dyslexia too. And they also might have difficulty with syntax, grammar, punctuation, all of those like sentence skills that build a good writer. One of the
Kelly, if a child has illegible or messy handwriting, that doesn't necessarily mean that they have dysgraphia.
That's right. No, it doesn't. Nope. So really with that diagnostic, you have to look at that big picture because some kids might have messy handwriting because they were never explicitly instructed in handwriting. So um, a lot of schools now pulled handwriting instruction from their curriculum. So it truly could be just a lack of instruction. It could also be a motor disorder. It could also be just lack of practice. It could also be attentional. So I have some clients that have ADHD, and so if they can focus, their handwriting is beautiful. But then their handwriting can also be really messy if they're having a hard time. So yes, illegible handwriting does not or messy handwriting does not necessarily ensure a dysgraphia diagnosis. That's why I think it's important to remember it's the big picture. And one of the biggest, I think, red flags for me is if I see a child avoiding writing, the frustration piece of writing. And that was my daughter. She avoided, she ripped up papers, she crumpled them up and threw them, it was so frustrating for her. And to me, with all kids, that's a big red flag because we've got to dig deeper into that behavior and the why of that. And then the final sign I think that we have to remember is that difficulty getting thoughts out onto paper. So actually, your child might have beautiful handwriting, but they may not be able to get their thoughts out onto paper. They may be able to speak it and they share wonderful stories with you, but you put a piece of paper in front of them and they go blank. So that thought process too is another sign of dysgraphia. So we have the diagnosis, which we would get from a neuropsychologist or an educational psychologist in the school system or private, whichever you would prefer. What do we do now? And I think this is one of the hardest things that parents struggle with is they're like, okay, now we have the diagnosis. Now what? My two biggest recommendations is getting an educational tutor on board, somebody who's familiar with dysgraphia, and then getting an OT or a handwriting specialist like we do at Handwriting Solutions on board. They're going to assess and remediate different skills for the most part. So the educational tutor will look at spelling. If there's any reading or phonological skill delays, they'll look at grammar as well as the written expression. But that handwriting specialist who has training in that can look at motor skills, visual skills, cognitive skills, executive function skills, all of these skills that come into play with handwriting, whether you have dysgraphia or not. So, what I'm super excited to share with your listeners is the framework that I created based on what the evidence is showing right now. And I know visually it might seem a little overwhelming, but I'm going to break it down for you so that you can use this framework in your everyday life. So essentially, you want your child to be accessing education as well as life, because we can't look at reading and writing as just like a school, an academic thing. This is going to serve them for the rest of their life. And I know SOAR is that's your all's mission, right? Like you all serve kids well beyond these elementary and middle school years. You're serving them beyond that. So I think that that's really important to remember. But we first want to look at that problem and that barrier. We know that the child is not the barrier. It's what are the specific struggles that they're having. So that could be physical struggles, that could be cognitive struggles, or that could be visual struggles. Once we figure out those barriers, then we can decide what type of intervention would be needed. The interventions, there are three types. There's remediation. So that is actually building those skills, building up those physical skills, building up the cognitive and the visual skills. So we're making significant changes in those hard skills. But accommodation is giving the child tools in the classroom and outside of the classroom to make it easier. So that could be low tech. So something as simple as a pencil grip placed on their pencil can help them with their written output. But it could also be high tech. So not only using a laptop for keyboarding, but they also have different apps and extensions that you can take a photo of an assignment and the child can type in their work rather than write it. And then also modifications is the third type of intervention. And that is where we actually have the school changing the assignment for that child. So maybe they're decreasing the amount of written output that's required of the child. Maybe for spelling tests, they're allowed to spell orally rather than written. So it's modifying how that assignment is actually going to be administered. And then kind of the third piece, once we figure out the problem, the barrier, the type of intervention that we're going to use, we really got to be sure that we follow the research on what intervention should look like. We have got to make sure our intervention is individualized. So this isn't just a blanket curriculum that we're using. We're going to individualize it to the child, exactly what their needs are, and also building on their strengths. So that makes me think of the intervention should be strengths-based. We're going to use their strengths. For example, my daughter's strengths were visual spatial. They were through the roof. And so, light bulb moment, I'm going to use that to our advantage. I'm going to give her as much visual supports as I can to help her get that written output out. And then intervention should be systematic. So there should be some sort of order to it. We're not just going to sit down and copy letters and copy sentences. We're going to do that in a very systematic way. So we're going to start with certain letters that are easier, and we're going to build upon that. And then intervention should be explicit. That means that, again, we've got some sort of system, some sort of outcome, and we are explicitly teaching skills. We're not just going to hope that they get the skills, but we're going to teach them. Which leads me to kind of that foundational approach. So we know what intervention and remediation should look like. We know how to get there through accommodations, through remediation, through modifications. What I like to think about with dysgraphia and really any handwriting struggles, this can be applied to any, are those foundational approaches. So we want to start building our child's and our students' foundation. We're going to build up those physical and visual skills if they're lacking in those. So that could be building up their pencil grasp, their posture, their strength, their visual skills for letter formation, for line placement, pencil control, etc. We've got to have that solid foundation before we expect independence in writing. The next step is building up their cognitive skills. So grammar, phonological skills, spelling, attention, executive function, all of those skills kind of layer on top of those foundational skills to kind of move up the pyramid. The next goal is fluency. So we've built these underlying foundational skills. Now we want them to get fluent with that, meaning that we want them to be more automatic. We want it to flow a little bit easier and to be efficient. And then finally, we're at independence. We want that child to receive appropriate individualized remediation, accommodations, and modifications so that they can participate and perform in school and outside of school. And hopefully that makes sense, John, of really building that foundation.
It does. And so I've got a couple questions, and then we'll the first is how how um how malleable have you found schools to actually modify assignments?
So I would say this is a case by case thing. Absolutely. What I've found is I'm going to say most schools and most teachers want what's best for the child, obviously. When it becomes tricky when you're trying, I know parents can sometimes have a hard time with the 504 and the IEP plans, and that can be a whole other topic of conversation that we'll discuss one day. But essentially, if your child is in a public school, it's so important to get those 504 and IEP plans in place so that they can get those accommodations and modifications. Once you have that, then it should be no problem because they are legally bound to have to use those modifications in that school. But it's got to be in the plan, it's got to be written out. Now, with private schools, it's a little bit different. There's not the law there that requires them to follow that. But what I've found is a lot of times private schools are very open and flexible to providing those accommodations and modifications pretty easily.
One of the pieces of advice that I give families is that when you're going into those IEP meetings, sometimes it's really helpful to have a advocate, just another person who is in the room listening, hearing, not necessarily engaging, but but just having an advocate there can sometimes be the difference between being bulldozed and being able to have your needs met. And the truth is, schools want to do right by your kids. Their challenge is they don't have the money to support every student that needs special support. And so when you're asking for low cost options to try and help remediate or accommodate or make modifications, and you're finding that you're struggling, there are resources that you can find on the internet. Advocacy programs that can help with that. And then the most extreme case is, you have to get lawyers involved. But the school has a responsibility to make sure that, they get your son or daughter through school, ready to take on the world. And one of those basic functions is reading and writing.
Yep, absolutely. And I love you two things that I wanted to point out there. Um, yes, having an advocate, absolutely. We've actually sat in on our clients' IEP meetings before just to make sure that what what we're seeing and what they're seeing is similar, and then to make sure that they're getting what they need. The parent just asked us if we could sit in because she wanted to make sure that her son was going to get the OT that he needed through the school and the accommodations that he would get. And they were all very, very open. So, like you said, most of the time they're going to be open to hearing strategies and they're going to be open to that. But it is absolutely beneficial to have a professional there along your side to help advocate. And like you said, it doesn't mean that they have to be an active participant, but just somebody to kind of hear you out because it's confusing, and it's like they speak a different language in those IEP meetings. And so, to
It's true.
to yeah, to just have somebody there to say like, what does that mean? And what are we really getting? And can you look over this and make sure that this is a solid plan? And then yes, I think if you have to take it to that next level and you're able to, then yes. Because I've also heard, while I've seen some amazing schools handle children with special needs just fabulously, I've also seen parents have to fight and fight and fight to get them their help. And whether it's a funding thing or what, there are so many resources online. And on our Handwriting Solutions website, we've actually got a blog post about resources, online resources that can help parents, and accommodations and free. Like you said, the biggest thing is a lot of times the parent will even bring in suggestions to the school. They'll say, well, I saw this on a Facebook group that this parent tried this app, and it's a free app. And so I think we should try this at school. And I think that's great. And I think if I hopefully teachers and administrators will be open to that as well.
Yeah, I also wanted to point out how one of the things that I really appreciated about meeting you and getting a chance to talk with you was your theme about taking a strength-based approach, because it so reminds me of that story of the little bunny that goes to forest school. On the first day they're teaching hopping and the bunny loves school, and on the second day they're teaching swimming and the bunny failed miserably at swimming. And so the teachers and the principals of the forest school got together and they made the very wise decision that since the bunny excelled at hopping, they weren't going to do any more hopping and they were just going to double down on the swimming. And that's what happens to our kids sometimes. And so I really appreciate the idea that we take what's right about what we can accomplish, and then we find ways to expand and accentuate that into the realms of the areas that we're challenged. The final thing, I know that you're going to share some resources with us here in just a minute, but yeah, I wanted to give you a chance to go back through your presentation and choose your top three at-home strategies that parents can do right now to help support young people.
Awesome. So just to circle back on the strengths based, I think that I'll give you a perfect example of that. Again, when I said my daughter and her visual spatial skills, so that was able to give us insight into how we can adapt the environment. So my number one strategy, adapt the environment. Change the pencil, change the paper, change the placement, change the desk, change the chair. Any kind of physical adaptation that you can make to the environment, quiet the environment, change the positioning in the classroom. There's so many different strategies, but adapting the environment to that child's strength is only going to set them up for success better. The other biggest tip and strategy, build those foundational skills. So a lot of times people think my child's writing or this student's writing is poor. We better have them practice writing some more. And it's like, we'll get there, but first we've got to build up those foundational skills. So if a child doesn't have the core strength to sit at a chair to write, then we've got to start with the core strength before we even pick up a pencil and a piece of paper. And we're huge fans of that building the foundational skills and using multisensory tools to do that so that we're not just sitting at a desk doing pencil and paper tasks, but we're strengthening those areas that are more challenging for the child in a fun, engaging way that's stimulating different parts of the brain. And I could also, I've got a list on my website too of multisensory strategies that parents can use at home. Some of my favorite are chalk. So using chalk and chalkboard or sidewalk chalk, that's a strengthening activity. That's a sensory activity. They are getting so much feedback from having to push that chalk down hard. And then they're able to retain that and increases their retention of what they're learning. So building those foundational skills is the second one. And then, I've got four here, but really, I think that if I had to pick three, that individualizing and meeting the child where they are is just essential. We know that you work with kids and teens. We can't expect them to be here until we start at those foundational levels. So individualizing, meeting them where they are, using their strengths, and then taking them to the next level.
And you can have four. You deserve four.
Well, thank you. That's yes. My fourth would be that accessibility piece. And that really just as those accommodations and modifications, low tech, high tech. Listen, I feel like I learn about a new app every week. I see something new and I'm like, oh, well, that's cool. I'm going to try that out. So, and it doesn't have to be high tech. There is just so much out there right now and it's only getting better for these kids. So just being able to increase their access to education, and particularly for kids that struggle, it's a confidence thing. If we can give them the tool to share their thoughts, that's what we need to do.
Kelli, I know this is going to put you on the spot, but do you have a favorite app that you can point parents to right now that has come across your desk recently, and you're like, ooh,
Yeah, yeah. So I'll tell you one of my favorites is SnapType, and it was created by an OT, which is cool. And you take a picture of a worksheet and then you can type in the worksheet. One of my other new favorites that my daughter is really into lately is Canva. I feel like everybody uses Canva now, but we don't think about using that as a tool in the classroom. And so again, it's a visual thing. They can type and input whatever they need. And then Audio Pen is another new app that I've heard of. I have not tried it yet because it's pretty new, but it's beyond that like speech to text. I feel like we've gotten there, like we know how to use that. We realize that there are extensions for that, but now we're exploring so many more technological advances. So it's pretty exciting.
okay. And why don't we wrap up by sharing? I know that in your PowerPoint you've got a resources page, and so and how to learn more. So go ahead and tell us a little bit about that.
I offer a free 15-minute consultation to teachers or therapists or parents or whomever who just want to sit and talk with someone about maybe their concerns or how they can better. If it's a teacher, a lot of times I get teachers or therapists just saying, how can I help? I have this student. How can I help them? So definitely reach out. I've got a Calendly link there, but email is also one of the best ways. So it's KELLI at handwritingsolutions.org, and then the website handwritingsolutions.org. And be sure when you're at the website to go through the resources. I've got parent resources, I've got professional resources, I've got a blog with almost 60 articles that I've put together, just educating and sharing knowledge and tips and ideas and strategies. And then finally, just to share with if there are any parents who are looking for that next step of help, the first thing we do at Handwriting Solutions is an assessment. And the assessment is vital to digging deeper and looking at those foundational skills that we talked about. So That's where we would start. And then we offer one-on-one tutoring. We offer small group tutoring, clubs, camps. We do some coaching and consulting. And then we always are having some sort of free training and webinars.
Well, thank you again, Kelly, so much. Again, this has been SOARing, where we dive into the complex world of ADHD and other learning challenges. I'm John Willson, SOAR's Executive Director, and we've been talking with Kelli Fetter, occupational therapist, ed consultant, handwriting tutor, and the miraculous program, Handwriting Solutions. Kelli, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, John. It's been a pleasure.